regards the financial bailout, and I'm going to read it verbatim because it's not very long. No one, if I can read the writing, no one I know is happy with the rescue of those Wall Street scoundrels. But if the banks had failed, all of our pensions would also have gone down the drain. Are you willing to defend the imperfect rescue of Wall Street? And this will begin first with Congressman.
Sure. It's been mentioned, I did vote for the Troubled Asset Recovery Program. And you have to look at it this way. In September and October of 2008, our economy was on the brink. Many major financial institutions were on the brink. It was creating such a problem that there were people who were calling me, running to their local community bank, pulling money out because they were afraid about what they were reading about major institutions. We had to stop the panic. The credit markets were contracting. It was creating very real issues for the economy and for real people, very real people. You know, my opponent here, he said, his campaign said he was for the Troubled Asset Recovery Program. It was 18 months after the law was enacted. Then he said he was for one version against it. Then he was completely against it. Now, you have to make decisions. I have to make them before the votes. Bottom line is the financial services infrastructure for this country is at risk. And we could not allow for one on banks. We could not allow for that type of collapse. I mean, look at it this way. If the electric infrastructure of this country were to fail, you would expect the utilities to restore power, but you would also expect the federal government to step in. Because if we lose power, we're all out of business. Good to bad, good operators, bad operators. If people can't get money out of the bank with their ATM card, we're in big trouble. So bottom line is, that was a loan. That money's being repaid with dividends, interest, and loans. The federal government bought preferred stock from a lot of these banks, and we're recovering that money. Every last cent of that part should be used to pay down the deficit. My opponent has supported a second stimulus or some stimulus bill that would take repaid and unobligated Troubled Asset Recovery Program monies and use it for more stimulus. That is an enormous mistake. That money should be used as promised for deficit reduction. We made sure, too, that the FDIC limits were raised so that people were sure that their money would be protected if they had it in a local institution. So something that had to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Towne?
Sure. The person who asked the questions, I think, had it about right when he said scoundrels. I do not support the bailout of any of these banks, and what you have to understand is that when firms are liquidated, it's not as if everything would go into complete and utter chaos. What would end up occurring is that the debt would be revalued because the problem in the system is all the bad debt. And the Congress and the Federal Reserve have created this gigantic moral hazard by extending the supply of money and credit into the whole system. That is the root cause of the financial crisis, as well as excessive federal spending. Now, in terms of trying to solve the problems that we have, excessive federal spending will not be cured by yet more spending. And yet that seems to be that all the Republicans want to do, or the Democrats want to do, is tax and spend and borrow and spend. And this just won't work. People need to take responsibility, and again, we should stop these moral hazards and bring an end to these bailouts of our privatized industries.
Thank you. Callahan?
But I think what you've got to realize here is the bailout was bad enough, an $850 billion no strings attached bailout, which, when it was $700 billion, I'm going to read a quote from Congressman Dent on that bailout when it was $700 billion. He said, this bailout plan would have exposed taxpayers to a risk of $700 billion to buy toxic assets at inflated prices. Wall Street would benefit at the expenses of the taxpayers, and that's not acceptable. So we felt that way about a $700 billion bailout. What made them vote for the $850 billion bailout? I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that Congressman Dent was part of Congress that deregulated Wall Street, that led to the need for an $850 billion bailout, and then every opportunity that Congressman Dent has had to put any kind of curbs, any kind of safeguards, any kind of transparency on how those TARP funds were spent, to curb CEO bonuses, millions of dollars of your taxpayer dollars going towards failed CEO bonuses. He said no to that. But he's also accepted over $300,000 from Wall Street and banking interests. So perhaps that may have something to do with the $850 billion no strings attached bailout and his total lack of desire to have any accountability for how those dollars were spent.
Thank you. How do you feel about the drawdown of U.S. troops in Iraq and the announced target date for ending our troops' involvement in combat operations? We'll begin with Mr. Towne.
Sure, I think that drawing down the troops in Iraq is the first part towards getting all of our troops home. I think that we should be, I'm for the complete and orderly withdrawal of all troops from Iraq, and I will not approve a single dollar to be spent to extend these occupations of either Iraq or Afghanistan. I think that it's important to realize with the war in Iraq is that a couple days after the announcement of the 50,000, major Iraqi army headquarters in Baghdad was bombed. We're involved in a tribal civil war over there between the Sunnis and the Shias and the Kurds. And what we need to do is we need to get out of that country. We need to cut our losses. And we need to take care of ourselves here at home. The spending that we need to do is not going to be done by the federal government. The spending that we need to recover our economy is going to be done by private individuals. And the best way to do that is to cut the spending of our federal government.
Thank you. Congressman Dent?
Sure, with respect to the drawdown of troops in Iraq, I was one of the first members of Congress that asked at that time the Bush administration to enter into what's called a status of forces agreement with the Iraqi government, so that provided legitimacy to the Maliki government and to ours as well, as we talk about the ultimate decision of drawing down troops. There were a lot of reckless decisions and comments made by a lot of folks who were running for president at the time, talking about 6-month withdrawals, which they knew were unrealistic, couldn't be done militarily. But the bottom line, though, is the status of forces agreement negotiated at the end of the Bush administration called for basically getting us down to our current footprint of 50,000 troops by August of this year, and then 50,000 man residual force will be there through the end of 2011, and I hope that we can continue to draw down that force to the end of 2011. Things can change on the ground, but I do support the drawdown, and I think it's being done in a responsible manner and one that will not leave Iraq in a state of chaos, and it's able to secure itself and not be a threat to its neighbors. And I just want to respond to one thing you said earlier. There were executive compensation provisions placed in the CARP law that basically Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner could regulate executive compensation right now in golden parachutes. He's failed to do so. He's failed to do so. He has the authority. He hasn't done it. Between the first and second CARP votes, I have to tell you, there was no FDIC increase in there. Plus, I also had a conversation with Chairman Ben Bernanke of the Federal Reserve, who assured me that we were going to be repaid in the banks in short order. We might even make money on it. And so far, he's been good to his word, at least with regards to the banks. I didn't support using that money for car companies. You might want to ask my opponent how he stands on that. He doesn't take positions on these types of issues. But there have been some misuses of that. But the point being that I will tell you, Secretary Geithner has the authority now to regulate compensation. He's failed to do so.
Thank you. Mayor Callahan.
I'm certainly encouraged that the combat mission in Iraq has ended. I think that that's a sure sign of progress in Iraq. I think that, so I think that we're all supportive of that. And I think that whatever we do further in Iraq and in Afghanistan certainly has to be based on the conditions on the ground and based on the recommendations of the generals. So I think we need to be careful, in both Iraq and in Afghanistan, that we whatever we do is based on the conditions and the recommendations of the generals.
Thank you.
To support our men and women.
Thank you. The next question concerns the national debt, and we'll begin with Mayor Callahan. I'm going to try to read it word for word. In the past decade, we have seen Congresses controlled by both Republican and Democrat majorities increase the national debt to historic levels. If elected, what will you do specifically to work to reduce the debt? Mayor Callahan first.
Well, there's nothing written in stone that we've got to be running debt and deficits in this country. I mean, the last time we had a Democratic president in the White House with Bill Clinton, we were running $100 million surpluses in this country. I agree that I'm deeply troubled by the debt and the deficit in this country. It is and it's unsustainable. We all recognize that. And we cannot continue to spend money that we don't have and push this burden on to our children and to our grandchildren. I've put a plan in place. It's a 4-step plan It starts with ending the bailouts. It starts with, it's got pay-go as a part of that solution. It rewards innovation and encourages government employees to seek out waste and find out and empowers them to do their jobs better. And fourthly, it freezes spending on non-defense and non-entitlement funding. If we do those four things, we can get a handle on our debt and deficit in this country. And we've done it in Bethlehem. I made a commitment very early on that over a 2-year period of time, we would always pay down more debt than what we take on. And if you do that consistently enough, you can reduce your debt. We've got $60 million less debt today in Bethlehem than when we took office in 2004. And we are on track to lower our debt by 50% over the course of the next 7 years and 61% over the course of the next 10 years. But it takes discipline and it takes focus.
Thank you, Mr. Towne.
Sure, we can't spend more than what we have, and every American household and every American business realizes that, but the folks in Congress do not. The reason that they do not is because they have the power to print money. And again, the true national debt is not just the $13 trillion in the Treasury market, but it's the $107 trillion in the unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare. Again, this is nearly $400,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And I do agree with the consensus that this debt will never be paid back, and it's immoral to pass this on to future generations. We must cut spending and taxes, and what it really kind of boils down to for both of my colleagues is, do you support a balanced budget? Do you support not spending more than what we have? And again, one of the things that we should take a very close look at, the average American household makes $41,000 in salary, yet the average federal worker's salary is $71,000, almost twice the private sector. And again, about 20% of all federal employees make over $100,000 in salary. This is astronomical, and again, I asked my Mr. Dent and Mr. Callahan to take a cut in salary to show, the people that you mean what you say.
Thank you. Congressman Dent?
Yeah, sure. First, I want to talk about debts and deficits. I was rather being instructed by Mayor Callahan on deficits.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Sure. I'm glad we're being instructed by Mayor Callahan on debts and deficits, given the sad state of fiscal affairs in the city of Bethlehem right now with an $8.5 million deficit. That their auditors, their independent auditors, have revealed for all of us to see. So bad that one Democratic city councilman said this is a financial disaster. Don Cunningham said the city is operating in the red, and we zero cash reserves. So I don't think we would be instructed by the mayor on how to fix a deficit given this mismanagement of the city's finances. That said, how can we deal with the finances of Washington, and how can we deal with debts and deficits? First, we can cancel unused TARP funds and basically the repaid funds and unobligated funds. He wanted to spend them for a second stimulus. Use it for deficit reduction. Cancel unspent stimulus funds. We're talking about a lot of money, probably around $200 billion. And by the way, it was $396 billion worth of TARP money repaid that would go to the deficit. Discretionary spending, cap it to a pre-stimulus level. $1.2 trillion stimulus with the financing has raised the baseline of federal spending. We need to bring it down to a pre-stimulus level. And we may make some exceptions for veterans and a few other areas for, I'll say, domestic discretionary spending. That's what I'm talking about, imposing this cap. And that would save us, we could probably, we're pushing $900 billion right there. I mentioned the line item veto earlier. To give the executive the ability to excise out unnecessary and wasteful spending. How about this? For every 2 federal civilian employees who leave federal service, replace them with 1. We can do that. These are very specific proposals. Again, we could also freeze civilian pay for a year. That's about a $30 billion savings. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, not part of the recent Barney Frank financial regulatory law. You know what? We can make some serious reforms there and save a lot of money. So my time is up, I see.
Thank you. The next question concerns jobs, and it will begin